Hello, everyone. This is AK Inamul Haq from Bangladesh, and I am with my friend Philip Shah from Canada. Today, we are going to discuss the Ukraine and Russia conflict that is happening in Europe, and we are all aware of it. In the last discussion that we had, we thought that this will not be this long. We thought this will be a quick, easy solution, but it didn't happen. But that has a significant impact on everyone in the world right now. And with that, let me invite Philip to discuss this issue for everyone. Phil.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Anil. I'm Philip Shaw from Dresden, Ontario, Canada. And it's interesting and tragic, and nobody likes the war that's going on in Ukraine and between Ukraine and Russia now. It's interesting. I think in one of our earlier commentaries, I can't remember exactly which one it was, we talked about, well, we don't want war because that will be incredibly negative for the global economy. And, unfortunately, on February 24th, when Russia invaded the Ukraine, we have seen all kinds of economic carnage that has came from that invasion, not only on the country of Ukraine, which will have economic output was going to be severely curtailed this year, but also the same thing with more negative economic growth for Russia, for what's happening to them. And of course, after the invasion on the 24th of February, we saw all kinds of economic sanctions that were enacted by many countries, not all countries, but many Western countries against Russia that went into the financial system of the world, and they've impacted all kinds of products that are being exported to Russia. For instance, myself, I do farm for a living, and fertilizer is a big export that Russia exports into the rest of the world, and we have prices for those products way over 100% more than we paid last year. And at the same time, after February 24th and after the sanctions took effect in Russia, you had people lining up at the banks to get to withdraw money because they were worried about the real value of the ruble. And the ruble really declined over a period of time, but apparently it's back up to levels now where it was pre-February 24th. I'm not really sure about that, but that's what I've heard. Of course, one of the paradoxes is that Western Europe has been depending on Russian energy, whether it's natural gas or whether it's oil, to help run its industries for a long time. And this gives Mr. Putin the foreign exchange to run the war that he's got. And so, I think back to that earlier commentary that we had, where we hope that this doesn't happen because it'd be terrible for the global economy. And unfortunately, that's what we have here, because everybody has to adjust. We're still adjusting from the COVID-related supply restraints on the global economy. And then we have this shock to the global economy, which is really hurting all over the place. And you might be able to shed some light, Enamel, on your part of the world, but because I think India is still buying energy, they're still buying oil from Russia, and they have a different tact on that than some of the Western countries. But also, too, about 30% of the exportable supplies of wheat come out of Russia and Ukraine. And, I can attest that the price of wheat has almost went up 50% since this has started. And there's going to be quite bad food inflation in places like North Africa and Egypt, where they have a huge per capita consumption of bread, and they largely depend on the food and the agricultural commodities that come from places like Ukraine and Russia. So, when you think back to our earlier commentary, when we mentioned in passages we don't want war because it'd be bad for the global economy, well, here we are. And I'll let you take it from here and now.
Thank you, Phil. I think you have given the story that is more or less we all know. The difference that I see sitting in the Bangladesh and Asian part of the world, is a little bit different than the worry that you and all had on the Western side. Partly because if you look into the what we call the Russian sanctions, if you look into that, it's mostly West versus Moscow. The rest of the world is very quiet. And they are, I think if you look into the Pakistan is a nice story to look into this, how the government has fallen because of the interventions by the Americans. Pressure is also on governments of India, governments of Bangladesh, and many others. So you can see that is more of a global politics. And my feeling, and this is something that I have seen, that in this whole global politics, Asia has stood out differently than the rest of the world. Mostly, if you look into the Security Council as an example, the voting behavior of India, China, and United Arab Emirates, all in similar line all the time, because they all understood the conflict and they saw the conflict is between Americans and Russians, and Ukraine is in the middle of anywhere. No. So, in fact, what we see from our point of view is that Ukrainians people are suffering. That is a fact, and they are probably going to suffer more if the war is not going to stop. But on the top of it, the biggest problem that I see, like you, is the problem crisis coming for the rest of the world. And the crisis in two different ways. One is a food price up. Food price up is going to be a major issue. I can see that because Ukraine is one of the major producer of wheat and soy, and particularly uh, sunflower
Sunflower.
sunflower oil. So, given this, that is the second issue is that global inflation is up, and that has been also feeding into this. When you said that, for example, 50% price is up, not all because of war. You can blame war partly for it, but it's also because of the global dollar printing techniques that you have seen from the Americans, and that has raised the inflation. So, given this, particularly countries like India, China. Now, remind you, is a very interesting thing that India and China are not friends, and they are still on the same queue. They're still in the same line with this conflict. In other words, they're looking at it, and everybody is going to insulate. Just like if you look at Europe, have been trying to insulate themselves by buying Russian gas. Similarly, India has decided that it is also time to get some cheap gas from petrol from Russia because of this sanction, there has been something else has happened. Global currency is going to change, and that is happening. Like India decided that they're going to trade with Indian money with the Russians. Chinese have decided to they're going to use the yuan with the Russians, and even Bangladesh has. We have a nuclear power plant financed
Yeah.
by Russia. So we all are. We see all of us that in the global politics there is a pressure techniques happening, which I do not like personally because I think global world is not playing fairly because they are politicizing, not just politicizing, they are pressurizing government after government to what you can see the traveling of the secretary, United States Secretary, Assistant Secretary of States traveling to, even Secretary of Foreign Affairs traveling to Delhi, and they are trying to persuade them. And if you look into this line of thinking, I think what I see more of an Indian point of view, and I see they have given a very good rebuttal. One of the rebuttal they mentioned that look at amount of fuel that you are buying from Russia. We are buying much less than that, so do not come to us and tell us not to buy because you stop first. And everybody is trying to insulate. So you can see the standard, the way they think about it. The second rebuttal, the Indian minister said that what you see right now is a mess created 30 years ago. This was Indian foreign minister statement that the world was going through this similar kind of a mess for the last 30 years. And the Western press, in a way, in the Eastern media like ours, lost their credibility after these Iraq issues. Particularly, remember this mass open of mass destructions, and that particular news. Now we see differently. Now, you can also see that YouTube has shut up everyone. In other words, they're not allowing the information to pass through. And that itself tells us that the free world is not free, it's more of a defined by someone else. And that is something bothers me because I think we people across the world, particularly in our region, thought that BBC is free, provide better news. We thought that DW is free, provide better news. We thought CNN was free, providing better news. But what I see, and this is my personal opinion, that we see they are all embedded journalists. They are providing the news from the point of view that their government line, and some probably something is patriotism with it. So I think the news that you see and I see, the conflict, the way definition of conflict that you see and I see is completely different from two sides of the world, as we are
Yeah.
talking about each country. So that is where I see, and I see every country is trying to insulate themselves against this. So I don't know how far it will be successful. The biggest trouble will be for the poorer countries to really insulate this, because I think inflation is coming at a high price for these countries.
Yeah. And like, I keep in mind that you know, when my first trip to Bangladesh was in 1993,
Yeah.
and we went every morning. You would go down, and we would collect about 4 or 5 different newspapers. And I would say to you, "Why are you reading so many different newspapers?" And you said you're trying to find out the truth.
Truth, exactly.
Because you don't know what the truth is.
Mm.
And each newspaper has a particular bent on the government of the day in Bangladesh, this, that, and the other thing. And you know, I always thought that was so strange, but I get it now because you know, over a period of time, especially the last 5 years living here in North America, I do understand that, and you know, I don't want to though change the subject with regard to the war in Ukraine. It's like, yes, we get two different interpretations, and like I started our preamble by asking, what is the truth here? What is the truth? And one thing I wondered was, what is the truth about what Putin was doing in Ukraine? Did he expect to take Kiev? Now, I'm not a military analyst, so I don't know. I wonder what the truth is now. Well, it seems to be they are attacking the Donbass region of Ukraine. You have mentioned to me that you could see even this expanding out. And I don't want to talk about military strategy because you really don't know anything about that. But you know, it is a terrible, terrible thing going on. And I would hope at a certain point that it stops. And I'm not quite sure how that's going to happen.
Yeah, I think in terms of what you've just mentioned, that what is the truth, we don't know because the narratives are different. The narrative from the Western press is completely different than the narratives of Eastern press, including Indian press, including Chinese press, including Russian press. So as we say that even though, for example, RT has been closed by the YouTube, but RT is available for us in a different way. So we see the RT, we see the Chinese news, and the narratives are completely different.
Yeah.
Not only narrative of the conflict, but also narrative of the events. Like, for example, a bombardment happens, and the complete narrative is not exactly the same thing. And remember that war, we have been seeing this war for the last 40 years, almost like 30 years. And in every war, civilian casualties were there. And idea was this was described as a collateral damage. Intention was not the civilian, but civilians were killed. And probably that is the truth of it. Now, the narratives that people see is more of creating more expanded conflict. I'm more worried about it because the narrative that is happening right now, every nation, other nations, probably not in this our part of the world, because we see both narratives. And if you don't see the narratives, you get enticed, you get excited, and there is a probability that the governments of the West will get into the war. And to me, that is a catastrophic consequence coming unless somebody is aware of it. And I hope it does not go that far because this will lead Europe to the state of 1945.
Well, we don't want that to happen.
But the narrative is going into that direction to entice population, public opinion, towards that. And I hope it does not get to this. That is how I see this. Because that
Well,
is,
it's a very difficult thing to consider. In Canada, for instance, we share a border with Russia just north of us, and we have defense resources up there trying to keep an eye on them. And I understand the different narratives about how it's looked at. I also understand the narrative that there's 4 million Ukrainians that have fled the country, but there's a million Rohingya that fled Myanmar, right? There's other narratives around the world, in Syria, in the Republic of Congo, as well as South America. And of course, there's this one in Ukraine. And because it's Western European, it seems to be getting a lot more publicity these days. I don't know. The amount of suffering that's going on in Ukraine is very intense right at the moment. And Russian families are suffering as well. But from a global economic perspective, and we added the inflation onto it and the COVID supply-induced thing, it's still there. And then we have this pressure of the war and the pressure that's having on food prices. If it doesn't end soon, and it certainly doesn't look like it's going to, it's going to have a continued effect on our global economy, of contracting the global economy. And we don't want that. That's not good for the world as a whole.
yes, I think you're right. I hope that the global leaders, particularly political leaders, understand this, the consequence of it, and try to work on these narratives and try to resolve this issue, because it is a conflict. We cannot deny it. It is an issue that 4 million people left Ukraine and they are suffering. But there should be, instead of putting more fuel into this fire, rather than trying to find out that can we ice it, can we stop it, and can we come to a close solution to this, rather than trying to create a narrative that will antagonize public in the West against Russian warfare and get them involved. And I hope Europe understand it, because I think it is the Europe that will be the ultimate, the biggest loser in this war if it happens in that way. The Asian and rest of us will suffer from the food crisis. That's how I see it. That is the biggest crisis that we're seeing, and the governments are all aware of it. And that is one of the reasons why you see Asians and African nations are very quiet, because they understand we have nothing to do with it.
Very,
And,
yeah, very,
yeah,
very true, very true. And with regard to food inflation, that's going to affect the poorer parts of the world even worse than Western Europe and North America and places like that.
exactly.
So, what is the truth? What is the truth? Well,
We don't know what is the
we don't know. We don't know, but we do know that it's a terrible thing that's going on. And there wasn't live broadcasts and social media in World War II, or in the war in the Pacific and Asia. But there is now, and we see this up close, and what's going on is not good, and it's certainly not good for the global economy. And so we'll hope for better things ahead. I guess that's what you could say.
Yes, I think let us hope that the whole world listen to it and come to a close this war as quickly as possible. And let's hope for the best. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone,
Okay. Thanks.
listening to this.
Thank you.